Just a big thank you to Susanna for providing the policy context. I think that was extremely useful to put the project in the wider policy context, the developments that are currently happening with the new strategies and the partnership. And I think that's extremely useful also for discussing how the results from UNISECO could be best used both today and particularly also for the workshop tomorrow. I think that's a very important context and really extremely useful. And also thanks a lot, Susanna, for the offer to further facilitate contacts with colleagues who oversee the CAP strategic plans. I think, again, we very much appreciate that, and that's extremely useful as well. Then also to further make use of the results and have further discussions in the coming months. So thanks a lot for that again. Okay, then I will give an introduction to the UNISECO project. And if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And I will talk a little bit about the background and objectives, or I probably should say I will let a short video talk instead of me. And then I will focus on the key elements of the UNISECO approach, the UNISECO project, explain those briefly, and then pick up a couple of points that Susanna already mentioned. So I will be very short there just to link back to the presentation before. And I think that's all for the introduction that we have planned now. And then, of course, we have the more detailed sessions with the results afterwards. So the next slide, please, Evie. Just to introduce briefly the whole consortium, the project partners in the UNISECO project. So we are a team of 18 partners, and it's really a transdisciplinary consortium from really different disciplines, research partners, but also networking and practice partners who are involved. And we are, well, the 18 partners we have in the consortium cut across 16 countries in Europe. And of course, the project is coming close to an end now at the end of April, and it was and still is a 3-year project. So we started in May 2018. Maybe the next slide, please, Evie. And then we come to the background and objectives of the project, and we thought it will hopefully be nice for you just to have a short video. I think it takes about 2 minutes, which picks up in a nice way the main objectives of the project, and also outlines the research questions that we have worked on in the last 3 years in the project. Okay, so basically what you hopefully saw in the video are the different main objectives and the research questions around that key dilemma of how to basically ensure increased public good provision while maintaining the economic viability and the social sustainability of the farming and food systems. And when we developed the project, we developed it around kind of three main parts that we constructed the project around. So it's a systems-based approach to understand those barriers and drivers for agroecological transitions. Then the importance of the multi-actor engagement with the farmers, the advisors, but also the value chain actors, the consumers and the policymakers, and a range of different tools and methods that for the sustainability assessments and also for understanding those barriers and drivers, the governance changes, and to enhance the kind of co-learning with the actors in the different parts of the project. So if we go to the next slide, Efi, please. And before I explain a little bit more the different elements of the UNISECO project, just a few sentences on the agro-ecological farming systems and the understanding that we used in the project about agro-ecological farming systems. So basically, when we started the project, we built this and we linked this to the 6 ecological principles based on Altieri et al. 2017. For the design of agroecological farming systems, such as enhance the recycling of biomass and the most favorable soil conditions, have a spatial and temporal diversity of species and genetic resources. So it's around those 6 principles, but really the most important point I want to emphasize here at the beginning of the presentation, just to better understand the scope of the project, what we looked at is that we in UNISECO did not only look or did not focus only on systems that really fulfill all those 6 principles already and are fully agroecological farming systems, but the idea in UNISECO was to cover systems that also are initiating, so conventional systems that are initiating transitions. So it's about systems that initiate transitions and systems to look at how to enhance transitions towards agroecological farming systems. The next slide, please, Efi. So in terms then of the main elements of the UNISECO project or the UNISECO approach, as a kind of umbrella, really, it's we have the multi-actor platforms that we have set up and managed throughout the project, and also done the monitoring of the engagement and the benefits that come from the multi-actor platforms, really with the aim to foster engagement and the working together of the different key actors in the systems. We used, and I will show that in a minute in a little bit more detail, a socio-ecological systems framework as the conceptual framework really for assessing transition pathways and to understand the systems and where are the barriers and drivers. We then have done the empirical data collection in participatory case studies in 15 countries across Europe. So really that was one key part of the project, really with the aim to co-construct knowledge with the different actors in the multi-actor platforms and to co-construct the strategies and new and innovative incentives that can be provided through market and policy. So it's about understanding the barriers and drivers, assessing sustainability performance and lessons learned for practice and policy. Then another key element of the project is the territorial level assessment using biophysical and socio-economic modeling approaches and also scenario development that we have done again, in particular at EU level with EU level actors, but also with some actors from the case study maps to create storylines for agroecological futures that then inform the modeling and the simulations that were done at territorial level. And finally, the development of an agroecological knowledge hub that we will use for exploitation, and that also includes a spatially explicit online tool, the SESE tool, that we will also hear later about more later today, to really disseminate and exploit the different results, both quantitative and qualitative. If you go to the next slide, please. And just to say a few more words on each of the elements in terms of the conceptual framework, it was important that we use a consistent theoretical underpinning, really, that is then the basis for the practice and policy recommendations that we are now deriving. So we use the sociological systems framework, that we really can have a systematic analysis for the different socio-economic, environmental, and policy aspects that impact on the farming systems, both within the system boundaries, but also externally of the system. We created a first typology of agro-ecological farming systems that we are now further revising in the final stages of the project, taking into account all the results from the case studies and the territorial level assessment. And we also used the conceptual foundation to really consistently then design the case studies and select the case studies. That's something that we have done during the first phase of the project. There are a couple of key deliverables here that are worthwhile looking at. So, for example, the adapted framework and guidelines for the sustainability assessment, and also the typology of the farming systems, and the selection of the case studies. If you go to the next slide, please. And just to briefly show you an overview of the schematic structure of the socio-ecological systems framework and the kind of key questions we used it for. So we have in the center the focal action situation that impacts on the implementation of the agro-ecological practices. And then we used the framework to really understand the processes of the systems in the different parts and elements, subsystems, and in the status quo, and use this as a basis then to identify barriers and drivers, and really to understand why these are barriers and drivers and how those could potentially be addressed and overcome. So that, for example, includes the governance systems and questions such as what are the governance systems, looking at state regulations, but also to collective rules, and also looking at the actors in particular, who are the actors involved in the governance of the system, and what kind of influence do these actors have really on decisions on implementing agroecological practices. That framework also covers the kind of transformation systems, so it also then looks at the linkages to the wider food system, the value chain, and are, for example, looking at questions if farmers are really significant players in that, or who are the key actors that need to be considered there in the assessment and in the co-construction. So it's around that framework, this systematic analysis and structure, that we developed the analysis of and the co-construction of the transition strategies, how to overcome the different barriers and for agroecological transitions. Next slide, please, Efi. And just the second point to briefly pick up is then the issue of the governance challenge. So a key aspect in the project was to look at cooperation and how enhanced cooperation, so moving from individual interests to collective strategies and the different forms of cooperations along in between, how this can basically contribute to improving the delivery of public goods and having a kind of balance between public and private goods, and how to support to move from short-term actions to long-term strategies in terms of achieving those objectives, and basically what role does different forms of cooperation have in terms of new governance arrangements for the systems. And if you just click again, please, Efi. And then linked to that, we looked in particular at the role of different market and policy instruments, different types of instruments in terms of promoting, creating the capacity for cooperation, enhancing the cooperation, and how different instruments, different types of instruments basically can support those processes. Next slide, please. Then on the key element of the participatory case studies, we used those for the empirical data collection, as I said before, and it's really for the co-construction then of the strategies on how to address the barriers and drivers for transitions, and also to together with the actors to analyze and identify the potential of different market and policy instruments to promote those processes. So we used decision support tools, we used interviews, workshops, focus groups, and then really it's about understanding performance, processes, and potential. So it's about the performance and sustainability trade-offs of agroecological farming systems. It's about the processes, how drivers and barriers can be addressed in those different local contexts of the case studies. And it's about the potential of innovative market incentives and policy instruments that then inform also future recommendations that we will hear later on. Again, there's a set of deliverables that are available to look at and that are now also in the process of being finalized and published. And we will have different sessions also in the afternoon on the case studies where there are more insights into specific aspects of those local contexts and case studies. Next slide, please, Evie. Then, as I said, we have the territorial impact assessment with the biophysical and socioeconomic modeling, really for assessing the sustainability at the larger scale, at the territorial level, and to look at, in a way, the kind of larger scale implementation of agro-ecological practices and changes in the systems at the higher level. So the identification of different practices that were coming out of the case studies and to the extent that those are suitable to be implemented at territorial level, and then to do with the models to do assessments of the implications, and also to look at the different storylines developed in the scenario development for agroecological futures. So it's a participatory scenario development. It's about the large-scale implementation of practices, and it's about the assessment of EU-wide sustainability impacts. And we will hear more about this also in the next session. And again, then in the afternoon, there are sessions dedicated specifically to those aspects of the project. And again, we have deliverables here that to further look at in terms of the participatory scenario development and also the territorial impacts that are also available at the booth in the afternoon for everybody. The next slide, please. Then I referred to the Archaeological Knowledge Hub. So basically what we are in the process of finalizing, and we will have later an introduction to the Knowledge Hub and its structure, really as a hub for disseminating and exploiting the different results of the project, and also linked to that knowledge hub, then the socio-ecological systems interaction tool, SESIT, that basically is used to disseminate and also further exploit the results. It shows the different story maps from the case studies, so more narrative, qualitative results, but it also shows quantitative territorial level results that are coming out of the modeling at the territorial level analysis. Again, there are a set of different key deliverables in terms of the Archaeological Knowledge Hub and the SESIT tool in terms of the concept of the tool, but also a handbook that we are currently finalizing, and deliverables on the structure of the Knowledge Hub. Next slide, please. And the final key element I would like to briefly talk about is the multi-actor engagement. As I said earlier on, it's a kind of umbrella for the whole project, where we set up to manage and monitor the kind of multi-level transdisciplinary multi-actor platforms, really to have that engagement with the actors in the case studies and also at EU level, and then also to bring the actors together at workshops and different participatory events to combine the expertise in the stakeholder reference group across the different levels. So it's really about a pool of participants at EU level and from the case studies. And it's about consultations that we have done, group learning processes, and really integrating the practical and the theoretical knowledge for then to build and to co-construct the project results. We also have done a monitoring and assessment of the engagement, and again we will hear later in one of the sessions in the afternoon also more in detail about the use and the experience with the multi-actor platforms in one of the sessions in the afternoon. And of course, we also have integrated here the project advisory group and also the really effective collaboration with the DG Archi policy officers, with Susanna, but also with colleagues from Susanna at different events. That was extremely useful, and with Lara from the Research Executive Agency, our project advisor, and different collaborations with different projects in the Horizon 2020, be it the LIFT project or a number of other projects as well. Again, there are a set of key deliverables, guides on transdisciplinary and multi-actor frameworks, and also on the evaluation of the tools and methods and the multi-actor approach. If you move on to the next slide, please. And finally, just to briefly pick up a couple of issues that link back to what Susanna already nicely outlined in terms of the policy context and also the policy impact of the project. Of course, there's on the one hand the farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy 2030 with different elements, different aspects like the farm to fork targets that we also heard about where the project can contribute to. With respect to the common agriculture policy beyond 2020 in relation to the eco schemes that Susanna already referred to in detail. And also an important aspect here is the partnership on agroecology that Susanna already introduced, and we will focus tomorrow at the workshop also as one of the key elements for our discussions and key developments, where UNISECO and also other projects can contribute with hopefully their results and expertise and experience from work on agroecological issues, be it, for example, on barriers and drivers of transitions, governance networks, and key actors in farming and food systems. And I think that's all what I really wanted to summarize for the introduction. I have a few more slides, if you just to briefly maybe remind everybody on the program. I hope this is readable, but we have now and after this session, further plenary sessions on the project overview and main findings. So on the governance and sustainability issues of agroecological transitions, then on the Knowledge Hub and the CESE tool. And then before we go to lunch, we will briefly introduce the afternoon with the different parallel sessions and the booth. If you go to the next slide, Efi, please. Thank you. And then we have a set of parallel sessions where you can choose from. That's 7 sessions. 4 are on different case studies, where we group the case studies into 4 parallel sessions with different lessons and insights from different systems that were studied in the case studies. And if you go to the next slide, Ify. And then also parallel sessions on the territorial level impact on the multi-actor platform approach, and also on the SESA tool, the socio-ecological systems interaction tool. All those 7 sessions will run parallel, and we will run it twice so that you have the option also to visit 2 different sessions in the afternoon. And then a final slide, if we have the different booths, and we will show that in more detail before we go to lunch, where there is more information available, where the story maps are available from the case studies, other reading material also, and a short interactive material for videos and on the different topics of the project. And I think that's all I wanted to say really for the project introduction, but I would like to close also with a big thank you to all members of our multi-actor platforms in the different case studies at the EU level multi-actor platform, and also all our project advisors, and also again to Susanna and Lara for all the cooperation during the project. Your involvement has really, in all those multi-actor platforms, all those events, was really very important to the project, and it was a fantastic experience that we could have with you. Thanks a lot.